If you have a true scary story that you'd like to hear featured on the channel, then go to mariesfield.com and send it my way. And of course, thank you. I've been bouncing between a few different dating apps for a few years now. And while I'm still not in a long-term relationship, it hasn't all been bad. I've at least met a few people that have become good friends. I do have one date that was very memorable for different reasons. I'll start by saying I found my date on an app that was heavily used by the LGBTQ community. I am a female, and I ended up coming across a woman that I'll refer to as Jody. She was gorgeous. She had a few pictures on her profile, but her bio was kind of lacking. She gave a few things about herself and what she was looking for in a partner, but that was about it. Unfortunately, I'm used to seeing a fake profile on occasion and catfishers, so I was hesitant, but I guess I was thinking I would either find a good date or find another account to report. I was surprised when I got a response back within a reasonable time, and it didn't seem like a canned response. She greeted me and made small talk about herself and what her interests were. She even apologized if she seemed dull and short, as she explained she was new to this and just recently accepted who she was. This made me feel a bit better about her being a genuine person, because it's normal for people to be withdrawn and shy. So I was ready and willing to take her under my wing and help her feel more comfortable with herself. We started talking more and quite frequently, daily even. It all stayed within this app though, as she said she wasn't ready to talk or text via phone. I could understand that, especially if she hadn't come out to her friends and family. So it was probably about 3 weeks of us talking. I wasn't too confident that we would ever meet, or at least not in the near future, so I started accepting the fact that she may just be a new friend, which was fine. However, she did finally ask about meeting up casually for drinks or something, and I was all for it. Jody and I agreed to meet at a bar and grill that was about midway for both of us. She was already there when I showed up, and she looked just like her photos, except her hair was a little longer. She was sitting at the bar, looking around the front for what I would assume would be me. I walked over to her, and she hugged me immediately and had the biggest smile on her face. We ordered drinks and wings, and just continued our conversation from the app. It was like we knew each other for years. We could finish each other's sentences. We had the same sense of humor, and she just genuinely seemed to have a lot of fun. Like, I could tell this was the true Jody. This was who she wanted to be. She grabbed my hand a few times and said she really appreciated me being so patient with her. It wasn't a big deal to me. I would like to assume that anyone meeting new people would do the same, but I know we don't live in a perfect world. Now, the date was going great. Perfect, even in my opinion. But one thing I noticed was how her phone went off quite a bit, and she would constantly look down at it. However, other than looking at it or swiping the notifications away, she stayed off of it. I'm sure many people would find it rude, and if she was constantly on it, I'd probably have a different opinion on it, but I couldn't help but notice that when she did look at it, her mood seemed to change. Her smile would slowly fade, then she would look back up at me and smile. At some point in the night, her phone lit up with a phone number, but I couldn't see the name on it. It was obviously a phone call. It was clear it was getting to her based on her size and how her swiping to dismiss it was getting more and more eccentric. So I just told her, If you need to answer someone, I totally get it." She immediately started apologizing, and I assured her I wasn't upset. It just seemed like it was important and suggested she take it if she needed it. She thanked me and excused herself, saying she would be right back. I watched as she walked to the front and started talking on her phone. From the look on her face and hand motions, I could tell it was not a pleasant conversation. When it was finally over, she walked back and again apologized for that, and now, clearly upset, she explained that it was her ex and they split up over a month ago, but wouldn't leave her alone. Given the situation we were in, and since she didn't say much more about them, I just assumed it was a bitter ex and didn't want to ask because she obviously didn't want to talk about it. So we pushed it aside and continued with our date. After we finished our last drinks, we decided to head out for the night. I was pretty smitten with her, so when she looked down at her phone one more time and then asked if she could spend some more time at my place, I agreed. She wanted to leave her car there and just ride home with me. We walked to my car and got in and continued our conversation on our way home. The parking lot at my apartment was pretty limited, and since I was getting back late, I was going to have to parallel park. There was a car behind me, so I rolled down my window to let them go by before I started. As they were passing, they slowed down, almost to a stop right next to me. At first, I was about to make a comment about them being in the way when Jody said, "Oh my God," and then exclaimed, "That's my ex's car." It was too dark for me to see a person inside. They may have had tinted windows too, but it was hard to tell. But they did have a lighter colored stripe down the side, so I assumed that's how she could tell. I definitely wasn't ready to deal with an ex on a first date, but was ready to call the cops if necessary. So, after they finally passed me, I parked and got out, ready for confrontation with some crazy lady. What I did not expect was this burly football player guy to get out. Crap, all I could think in my head was, he wouldn't start a fight with a girl, right? He immediately yelled at me, demanding to know who I was and what Jody was doing with me. Before I could say anything, Jody jumped in and said I was a coworker, that we had just had dinner, and that I was going to show her my guinea pig because she was thinking of getting one. I did have a guinea pig, so I guess that wasn't a lie. I just stood there letting her talk to see where this would lead. However, as his tone became more and more aggressive, I put my keys between my fingers and unlocked my phone. She was over on my side of the car already, so as he got closer and closer to her, I could tell she was visibly shaken. I did not like where this was going, so I approached them, saying he needed to step back. But before I could finish, I was punched in the jaw with enough force to make me fall backwards. I was trying to regain my composure and trying to figure out what just happened when I heard Jody screaming. I stood up and saw that she had run to the other side of my car, and this guy had just grabbed her by the hair, dragging her to his car. I was terrified. I'm far from being a small girl, but there was no way I was going to be able to stop this guy. I quickly called 911, but thought I needed to do something right then for her. There was no way of knowing what would happen to her if he left with her. If he was willing to deck a total stranger, and a girl at that, what was he willing to do to his own ex? So I ran to them, screaming for someone to call for help, shouting out my address and grabbing Jody from the front to hold her back. I was trying to hold her hair so he wasn't ripping it out, but he was fighting me the whole time. Thank God someone walking their dog noticed all of this and immediately ran to us. He started fighting the ex, and the dog was biting ankles until he finally gave up. He let go of Jody and turned his anger on this Good Samaritan. He didn't get any hits on him before the cops showed up, though. He was detained, and I sure as hell pressed charges. Once he was out of sight, we all talked to the cops, and that's when I learned that this guy was just as abusive to Jody behind closed doors as he was that night in public. She finally had the courage to split, but he didn't accept that, of course. She was very apologetic and embarrassed, but it's not like it was her fault, so I still invited her in to calm down. We talked more that night, and she ended up staying, so she knew she had a safe place to go in case he got out somehow. To sum it up, Jody and I became really close. A romantic relationship didn't really work out for us, but she has become a really good friend, and in fact, we live together. I at least was able to convince her to file a restraining order and block him on everything and everywhere, so she could finally stop hearing from him. I do joke with her, though, that was definitely the most memorable first date I have ever been on. This happened to me back in the 80s when I was working at the bank in Richmond. My friend Marty and I would eat lunch together most days. We worked at a data center where there wasn't much around us except a sub shop across the street. We would get our food and walk back and eat in our lunchroom. Most of the time, we would get a 12-inch sub and split it between us. On this particular day, we decided to go and get our normal 12-inch tuna sub and split it. We purchased the sub like we did all the other times and brought it back. We both took a half of the sub. I was the first to take a bite. After I bit into the sub, it started crunching and it wasn't lettuce. Marty was looking at me funny, so I spit it out and ran my fingers through it. All through the sub were tiny pieces of glass. That freaked us out, and I'm glad we didn't swallow it. We got both halves of our subs to take back over to the sub shop. We walked in, and she looked surprised to see us back. We told her what we found in our food, and she thought it was funny. That pissed us off. She asked if we wanted another sub, and we said no, we want our money back. She went back and got the manager, and he acted nonchalant about the whole thing. Well, that put Marty and me into a revenge kind of mood. I could have really been injured. We got our money back and went back to the office. We looked up the number for the health department, and Marty called them. She explained what we had just been through, and they told us they would check it out. A couple of days go by, and the health department actually calls us back. They went to the shop, and they were using a cracked crock pot to store the tuna in. Well, they gave them 24 hours to get a new crock pot, and they needed to discard that tuna immediately. When they went back to check if they had complied, they were still using the same crock pot. I guess they thought it was still a joke. They ended up closing down, and it turned into a car lot. But it's just so scary what could have happened if I swallowed that glass. Well, this is my scary sub-story. It may not be the scariest, but it sure as hell freaked me out. Back in the 80s, I thought I was strong enough to work in a children's psychiatric hospital. I loved kids. I always wanted them, so I thought this was a good way for me to be involved and help those that could use an adult figure. Many of the kids I saw come in there had real disorders or experienced traumatic events that will probably always affect them. But then there were also cases where the kids just seemed a bit more eccentric and their parents didn't know how to handle them. So this was the easiest option for them. I was warned by several people to never let your guard down. Always keep an open mind and don't take everything at face value. But things always look easier until you actually try it for yourself, right? That pretty much summed me up when I went into this job. One day, we got this little girl I'll call Shelby. Shelby was about 8, I believe, and on the surface, seemed to be a very kind and intelligent girl. When she came in, she was very quiet and shy, and I usually saw her sitting alone, reading or coloring. When a patient comes in, though, we have an entrance interview to kind of get an idea of what they may be suffering from and what kind of treatment we can do to help them. I didn't get to attend hers, but I heard from other staff that it went pretty normal. She was healthy on the outside, but when they talked to her about her thoughts, all she really said was, "Sometimes I think about bad things and I can't help it." They tried to clarify, but they said she didn't or wouldn't really go into detail. She wouldn't even specify if it was when she was mad or scared or brought on by a specific incident or anything either. Now, this was normal to see too. Sometimes the kids didn't really open up to anyone for a few sessions, or some sadly seemed to even be rehearsed by parents that just wanted them out. So, we were told to proceed as normal, keep an eye out, and report anything she may do or say to us. So, doing what I did best, I tried to get the girl to open up some, and maybe even play with the other kids. My thought was, they are still children, so they should still get to play and enjoy their childhood. I approached Shelby multiple times, in just small talk and different activities, to see if she would be interested in any of them. As expected, she was hesitant, but she slowly started letting her walls down. It was innocent enough at first. She talked to me about her mom, her bedroom, and how much she missed it and couldn't wait to go back. She even told me things that she liked to do, such as quilting with her mom and paper mache. I thought it was pretty impressive and thought maybe I could get the supers to get more craft supplies and do something similar. We had outdoor days on occasions for those that were a lower level threat, and I remember going and playing hopscotch with Shelby. After some time, we stopped and just sat on the bench talking about random things when she stopped mid-sentence to ask, "How long do you think it takes for a person to bleed out?" I, of course, didn't know how to respond, so I just said something like, "I have no idea," and asked why she asked. She just shrugged and, as if it was the same conversation we were having, said, "I don't know," as she giggled and returned to our original conversation. I had to tell the staff about it, unfortunately, in case it was a potential safety issue, and they were surprised, saying she wouldn't talk to or open up to anyone else. She had been sharing a room with another low-risk girl, but this conversation made them go in and take any potential dangers or risks out of the room. She seemed a little upset that we had to remove some of their supplies, but she didn't cause a scene or act out or anything because of it. She just seemed to understand. The weird conversations didn't stop, though. Again, I was talking to her about something unimportant when she stopped and asked me, "How much force would it take to break someone's neck?" I was stunned and again shrugged like I didn't know, but she continued into this a little while longer. She was holding a stuffed animal at the time and was pretty much acting out what she meant. She continued on asking things like, "I wonder if it would be easier to just squeeze it," or Or maybe if you step on it? Or maybe throw something on it. This whole time, she is acting it out on the little stuffed animal. I did my best to hide my reactions to this, but she didn't seem fazed either, as she then wrapped up the conversation and went back to talking about what we were talking about before. I was in shock. I know it may seem stupid now, but everything about her seemed so normal. I was so curious as to what made her like this, and even a little sad that she was so young and had thoughts like those. She shouldn't even know what any of that meant. Again, I went back to the leads and told them what she had mentioned to me and asked me to sit in on one of her interviews to see if maybe I could get her to talk more. I agreed, but the conversation wasn't much more in depth than what I was getting before. We definitely tried to steer the conversations, talking about what she wanted, then changing the subject to something like the above. She would ask what's the quickest way for someone to die. Is it easy to suffocate someone? Can you suffocate yourself? And so on. It was apparently enough for them to agree that she probably shouldn't be sharing a room, so she was moved to a single room. She was not happy with that idea though, and decided she didn't want to leave her room for about a week. She didn't do anything violent or destroy the room or anything. She just sat at the little desk that was in there, staring at the wall. She even got some of her supplies back, like her paper, crayons, and paint, but when she did use them, they were simple pictures and doodles, nothing like she used to do. When she finally decided to come back out in the living area, she proceeded as she normally did, coloring with the stuffed animal next to her, but she didn't really want to talk with me much, so I just left her alone. Everything seemed to be fine. We did our rounds and even had a camera room where security could watch as well. It was the 80s, as I mentioned, so the cameras weren't the best and they kind of flipped between them all, but they did a great job watching them. Shelby asked for something specific to drink, like orange juice or milk, so I agreed to go get some. I thought I would do a special treat for the kids, as we were able to do that sometimes, and started gathering drinks and snacks with the cafeteria staff. As I was heading back, I heard someone call a code brown. That was when a kid was missing. It didn't happen often, but sometimes they tried to leave, sometimes they just wandered off to hide, so I was on alert and ready to start searching, but I'll say I wasn't too worried at that point. Until I got back up to the living area and started hearing more calls for red and all security. Red meant there was violence and they were calling in for help. That's where I became worried, because they were being called to the garden, which was part of the living area. I ditched the cart of snacks and ran towards the area, and to my horror, I watched as security had to pull Shelby off of another girl who had what looked like a pillowcase or something wrapped around her neck. The other girl, of course, turned out okay, but she was turning purple and was almost unconscious. Shelby was, of course, punished, meaning she wasn't allowed activities with others or in her room and was locked in her room. I learned from the supers and the doctor that when asked why she did it, she said she just wanted to know what it was like to kill someone and to watch what happened to someone when they died. She had managed to find a blind spot in the cameras and lured the girl over there and used her pillowcase to strangle her. This brought on changes to the bedding, among a lot of other things at that point. I learned a valuable lesson from her though. You really can't see everything about a person on the outside, even children. I did hear from one of my friends that worked there that she did end up leaving the facility, but I ended up leaving first. It wasn't as easy as I expected. I'm in pediatrics now and have been since, but I truly do hope that she was able to go on to live a much better life. I have a story about something that happened to my family back in the early 2000s. And while I say family, it was centered around my aunt, but it also affected my mom and dad as well, and even lingered into causing harm to people we didn't even know. It'll make sense as the story goes on. To give a bit of background into my family, my mother half owns a salon with one of her college friends. The two of them have been in together on it for around 25 years, and they've always had a great relationship and pretty consistent clientele. They've made decent money since they started, and they have a good staff of people that work various shifts. Really, it's just your normal successful salon. Now, my aunt has been a major part of my life since the day I was born. She has always been a stay-at-home mom, and when my mother had hit a point where she needed to get back to work, my aunt kind of took over raising me until I started going to school. Even then, I would get off the bus at her house after school and would spend some time with my cousins until my dad got off work and came over to pick me up. So, needless to say, my aunt has always been like a second mother to me. Unfortunately, she has always been in a bit of a rough marriage. My uncle, her husband and the father of her two kids, had taken to drinking to unwind. The problem is that his unwinding quickly turned into addiction and then full-blown alcoholism. He was drinking heavily every single night. He was waking up with a hangover and not going to work. Then, he ended up getting fired because he showed up to the dealership where he was a mechanic, and they could tell that he was at least buzzed. From there, things just started getting worse. With no income, they weren't going to be able to keep the house. They were struggling with the basic financial needs on a day-to-day basis, and my uncle had started taking his frustration out on my aunt. I think most of you can assume what I mean by that. But she was basically explaining that it was escalating beyond what it was, and that things were seeming like they were just going to get worse. From there, she was talking to my mom about getting her own place and looking for some recommendations. My mom, being the person that she is, told my aunt that she was welcome to come stay with us for as long as they needed to, and that we could move things around to make it work. At first, my aunt wasn't sure if she wanted to go through with it, but after a little bit of convincing, my mother had basically talked her into doing so. Then, on my birthday, which was the first week of April, my aunt and cousins had gotten their things and moved into the house, and she had successfully filed for divorce against my uncle. My uncle, as one can expect, was not happy with how things were going, but he didn't have much of a say in the matter. They had gone through a lawyer that my mother knew, and it became a situation of the divorce is happening and the kids are going with her because she has a stable place to live. As they were settling into living there, my mom had actually talked with her partner at the salon and gotten my aunt a job there. Basically, my mom was going to make sure that this whole thing went as smoothly as it could, and that my aunt would be back on her feet in no time. That's just who my mom is. Unfortunately, pretty much immediately after they had moved in and they had started to feel comfortable, the phone calls began. At first, it would be my uncle calling, and when my mom or dad answered, he would demand to talk to his wife. They would professionally tell him that she was no longer his wife and that he needed to not call our residence. Anything he wanted to say needed to be done through the attorney until things were settled. Then he started calling and hanging up, calling from different numbers, calling and saying something that was vaguely threatening, and hanging up. He pretty much went through all the levels of being an angry creep. And sure, I felt bad for him, as this was obviously something that was a huge change in his life, and it was hurting him. But he had no one to blame but himself. Any pity that I had for him definitely dwindled as the days went on. And when I say days, I mean days. It was still April when he started to really escalate and get aggressive. The first step he took that was beyond the calling was showing up unannounced. He only did this once, but he had basically showed up in the middle of the night, probably around 1 or 2 in the morning, and you could smell the booze on him. He banged on the door for several minutes before my dad answered, and my mom, who was already calling the cops, mostly because he had driven over there and was obviously inebriated. When the police showed up and couldn't do a whole lot other than ask him to leave the property and tell him that he wasn't allowed to drive. Because he wasn't in the car when they got there, they couldn't say that he was driving drunk, as there was no proof that he had driven. He tried to argue with them, but they were beyond adamant that he needed to call a cab or call someone to pick him up. They then told my aunt to get a restraining order against him if this was going to be a big thing, as that would make it to where they could do more if he tried to get to her again. She said she would, and then told them that it's been a fairly rocky divorce and that there was already a lawyer involved. They stuck around until he got into the cab, and then they left as well. That, unfortunately, was not the end of it, though the next day was. After that night, my aunt was a bit shaken and apologetic about the whole thing. But my mom was very pushy about the fact that it wasn't her fault. Despite this, my aunt told her that she wanted to call my uncle and have him meet her at the salon so they could talk and set some boundaries on things. My mother did not like this, but my aunt said it would be okay and that he just needed to be talked to like a child. So, my aunt called him and told him to meet her at the salon around noon so they could talk about the situation and maybe come to some kind of agreement. Unfortunately, he had other plans. He agreed to meet her there at noon, and she thought that was it. They went to the salon and started working like normal. Around 11, they were busy like they normally were, and they had a number of people in the chairs and a few waiting for their turn. From what I've been told, my aunt was working at the front register, facing out into the parking lot. When she saw my uncle's car pull into the lot, she sighed and made a comment to my mom about him being there early, and she told her that if she needed, she could head outside and talk to him now. She agreed and started walking around the counter, but as she was doing so, she looked up and saw the look on his face, and that he was seriously raging. She said that she had a bad feeling as soon as she saw him, but there was nothing she could do. He had put his car back in drive and gunned it. The way they described the sound of the car driving through the front wall of the building is painful. It was a smashing sound followed by screams of everyone in the building, and then just silence as the weight of what happened took over. Thankfully, no one was seriously hurt, though he had smacked into at least one person that was waiting, and they had minor cuts and bruises. What's worse, my uncle tried to get out of his car and run away from the scene, thinking that he could get away and not get caught somehow. Ignoring the fact that he had driven his own car into the salon where his wife worked, was on camera, and had been seen by multiple people, he thought he would be able to get away. He was also drunk, surprise, surprise, so he was unable to really run very far. So overall, He ended up arrested for several different crimes. The salon had to be shut down for a month or so to get repaired, and a few people got to experience almost being run over while waiting for their haircuts. Thankfully, he went away for a long time, and my aunt was able to get things back in the right direction. But no one in my family has ever forgotten the day they were almost murdered by my insane drunk of an uncle. So that, my friends, was another scary story collection. Got some more, or at least another dating one. Scary kid. I don't know how I would react to those questions either. And glass in the sub sandwich. The tuna of all things. That's my favorite. I'm sorry, Cindy. That would be awful. And I'm sorry you experienced that. Because yeah, I would want my money back too, and also I would have some choice words to say to them. When it comes to that kind of stuff, I try to give people another chance because I work with customers, kind of work for the public. I worked, retail for a while, so I get it. But glass, and you just thought it was a joke? No, I would be a little angrier. And that they don't get a second chance on that one. Nope, not for me. Anyways, if you guys did enjoy this video, please do give it a like below. And if you'd like to hear more content like this, consider subscribing. And lastly, don't forget to leave a comment on your thoughts. Let me know what you thought of the stories, or let me know something that was popular in the decade you were born. Yeah, I thought about this question and then I try to think of something for myself, so I will also let you know in the comments. And with that being said, friends, I hope you have a fantastic week, and until next time, take care.